Coming live from the studio, this is All Sports with Gerardo. Thank you for watching another episode of All Sports. This is your host Gerardo, and all I talk is sports. On the show today, I am going to talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and Nhl Hockey. Before I start the show, I hope you all had a great week. To start off, at the middle every month, I post a video or talk about one stadium I went to, so stay tuned for future videos from stadiums across the US. For the month of August, I posted a video where I talked about Trust Park and my experience there. You can go watch that video on YouTube. You can also view videos from the past and subscribe to my YouTube page at All Sports with Gerardo. Moving on now to Major League Baseball. So right now I'm going to give you the current schedule for the Rockies. I'm going to tell you every team the Rockies went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Rockies go up against in the next week. To start off, last week the Rockies went against the Giants in a 4-game series during the week here at Coors Field. In the first game, the Rockies won a close game 7-6. In the second game, the Rockies won the game 5-2. In the third game, the Rockies lost a close game 4-3. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies won the game 6-4. The Rockies were able to win another series, and they took 3 out of 4 games from the Giants. This past weekend, the Rockies had an interleague matchup against the Mariners up in Seattle, which was a 3-game series. In the first game, the Rockies won the game 8-4. In the second game, the Rockies won the game 5-0. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies lost to the Mariners 5-3. So overall, the Rockies were able to win another series, and they took 2 out of 3 games from the Mariners. This past week, the Rockies returned back to Coors Field to have a 3-game series against the Diamondbacks. In the first game, the Rockies lost the game 12-8. In the second game, the Rockies won a close game 8-7, and in the final game of the series, the Rockies did lose the game 13-7. So the Rockies were only able to take 1 game from the Diamondbacks in the 3-game series, and it was the first series that they lost in the 2020 season. But overall, the Rockies are still playing some great baseball, and if you haven't, especially if you're a Rockies fan, you definitely need to watch the Rockies play some baseball games, no matter if it's here at Coors Field or on the road. They have been playing great baseball here at Coors Field and on the road. This weekend, the Rockies have an interleague matchup here at Coors Field, and they go against the Rangers in a 3-game series. Next week, the Rockies have a 4-game interleague matchup against the Astros. The first 2 games will be down in Houston, and the other 2 games will be here at Coors Field. So in the next week, the Rockies do have 2 interleague matchups here at Coors Field and on the road. So we'll have to wait and see how the Rockies play in those interleague matchups going into next week. So that's the current schedule for the Rockies. That's the teams the Rockies went up against in the last week. And those are the final scores of those games. And that's also who the Rockies go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. To start off in the American League East, right now the Yankees are leading this division at 12 games. But the Rays are right behind them at 12 games. And the Orioles are right behind the Rays at 10 games. So between the Yankees, Rays, and Orioles, it's a very tight race in the American League East. and all these teams are only half a game apart from each other. In the American League Central, right now the Twins are leading this division at 12 games, and the next closest team is the Tigers at 9 games. They're only 1.5 games back from the Twins. But right behind the Tigers, you also have another close race with the White Sox at 10 games, the Indians at 10 games, and even the Royals at 8 games. So as of right now, the American League Central does have a tight race, and all these teams, even though the Twins are leading this division right now, are only a game or two apart from each other. In the American League West, right now, the Athletics are leading this division at 13 games, and the next closest team is the Rangers at 8 games. They're 4 games back, and even the Astros at 8 games. They're 4.5 games back. In the National League East, right now, the Marlins are leading this division, and the next closest team is the Braves, and they're only 1 game back. In the National League Central, right now, the Cubs are leading this division at 13 games, and the next closest teams is the Reds and the Brewers, and they're sitting 6.5 games back from the Cubs. So as of right now, the Cubs do have a big lead in this division. And in the National League West, right now the Rockies are leading this division at 12 games, but right behind them is the Dodgers, and they're both tied for the division as of right now. And the next closest team will be the Padres at 11 games, and they're 2 games back from the Rockies and even from the Dodgers. So that's the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. In the Major League Baseball Power Rankings, the current top 10 Major League Baseball teams are the Dodgers, Yankees, Athletics, Twins, Cubs, Braves, Indians, Rockies, Rays, and Astros. So for this week, in the Major League Baseball Power Rankings, the Rockies were included in the top 10 for this week. And with the way they've been playing and the type of record that they have, there should be no reason why they were not in the top 10 Major League Baseball Power Rankings for this week. And they should have been in it last week. We'll have to wait and see if they're in it next week. But as of right now, the Rockies are in the top 10 of the Major League Baseball Power Rankings, especially with the type of record that they have as of this week. Moving on now to NFL football. Travis Kelce and the Chiefs have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. George Kittle and the 49ers have agreed to a 5-year contract extension. Tackle Dion Dawkins and the Bills have agreed to a 4-year contract. Head coach Sean McDermott and the Bills have agreed to a 6-year contract extension. The Broncos released tight end Jeff Heuerman. The NFL announced Antonio Brown has received a 8-game suspension for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. So with everything that Antonio Brown did, especially within the last year and during the 2019 season, as of right now, the NFL has handed Antonio Brown a suspension for all of his actions, especially for certain situations within the last year, and especially during the 2019 season, once Antonio Brown got released from the Patriots when he played for the Patriots that 1 week. And regardless if Antonio Brown makes it back to the NFL or not, he will have to serve this suspension. And whenever Antonio Brown, if he does make a return back to the NFL and gets signed to a team, before he even gets to play in the NFL or for whatever team he signs for, he will have to serve that 8-game suspension. So we'll have to wait and see if Antonio Brown makes a comeback to the NFL, or if an NFL ever signs him to a contract going into the future. But if a team does sign Antonio Brown, regardless of what team it is, Antonio Brown will have to serve that 8-game suspension before he gets to play for a team or in the NFL. So we'll have to wait and see if Antonio Brown ever makes a comeback to the NFL or gets signed to an NFL team going into the future. Moving on now to NBA basketball, Carmelo Anthony moved into 15th on the all-time scoring list. Damian Lillard moved into 8th on the 50-point games list. Damian Lillard and Will Chamberlain are the only two NBA players to score 60 points 3 times in one season. Damian Lillard is the only player with multiple games of 60 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists in NBA history. Since 1990, Kobe Bryant, James Harden, and Damian Lillard are the only 3 players to record 5+ 50-point games in a season. Damian Lillard is the first trailblazer with back-to-back 50+ point games. James Harden tied Shaquille O'Neal for having the most career 40-point double-doubles. So if we take a look at the NBA bubble down in Orlando, when the 2019-2020 season resumed in late July down in Orlando, we already knew what teams were going to be down in Orlando, but we didn't know what to expect, regardless if it was the Eastern or Western Conference. Now, there were some teams that were for sure a guarantee of making it into the playoffs, regardless of what conference it is. But the other teams that got invited that were not guaranteed to make the playoffs, but they had a chance to make the playoffs, it was exciting to see those teams play during this 8-game regular season that determined what teams would make the playoffs in both the Eastern and Western Conference. And there's no doubt that this 8-game regular season were great games. And it was exciting to watch all these games, regardless of what team it was trying to make it into the playoffs in the Eastern or Western Conference. But now that we are at the end of the 8-game regular season and we're going to head into the NBA playoffs, there was no doubt that the 8-game regular season was great, especially if you paid attention to the Western Conference. And it didn't matter what team you root for, regardless if it's the Eastern or Western Conference. But if you paid attention to the teams that were fighting for the last playoff spot in the Western Conference, which wasn't just 1 or 2 teams, it was a couple teams fighting for that playoff spot. Regardless of what team you root for, it was exciting to see those teams play and try to win games to get that last playoff spot and make it into the playoffs for this season. So, if you didn't watch any games or you didn't tune in to the NBA, especially if you're a fan of the NBA, and you didn't watch any games down in the Orlando bubble, you definitely missed out. But if you watched any games, regardless of what team you root for, you definitely watched some of the best basketball played for this season. And when the 2019-2020 season resumed down in Orlando, there was definitely expectations for all the teams. But for certain teams, you knew those teams were going to make the playoffs, and you had to see what seed they were going to get, regardless if it was the Eastern or Western Conference. But the teams fighting for a playoff spot, it was definitely going to be interesting to see how they would play, how many games would they win, would they make it into the playoffs, or if they couldn't win games, unfortunately when this 8-game regular season ended, their season would end as well. But overall, this 8-game regular season was great. Regardless if it was the teams that were guaranteed to make the playoffs and you had to see what seed they got, or if you watched the teams fighting for a playoff spot in whatever conference they played in, both those situations were great. But it was exciting to see those teams play and see, especially with the teams that were fighting for a playoff spot, how would they play and how many games would they win. And there's no doubt that now that this 8-game regular season has come to an end, there was definitely some surprise teams and also some breakout players. So if we take a look at this 8-game regular season, there was no doubt that no matter what team you root for, those teams fighting for a playoff spot were the most exciting teams to watch during this 8-game regular season. And some standout players included T.J. Warren from the Pacers, Gary Trent Jr. from the Trailblazers, Michael Porter Jr. and Bobo from the Nuggets, Devin Booker from the Suns, and Damian Lillard from the Trailblazers. Now taking a look at T.J. Warren, he was definitely a breakout player for the Pacers and in this NBA bubble. And he was playing some great basketball, and he was able to score a lot of points in every game for the Pacers. Gary Trent Jr. from the Trailblazers was another breakout player. He played some great basketball, and he was able to score points in every game for the Trailblazers. Michael Porter Jr. from the Nuggets. Everybody knew the potential of what Michael Porter Jr. was capable of, and he definitely showed what he was capable of during this NBA bubble and how he was able to lead the Nuggets to wins and score a lot of points as a starter or coming off the bench for the Nuggets so the Nuggets would win games. And there's no doubt that Michael Porter has a lot of potential going into the future. And if he shows what he's capable of, in the year that Michael Porter Jr. was drafted, there's no doubt he could have been the steal of the draft. As long as he doesn't get injured and doesn't have to sit on the bench, there's no doubt that Michael Porter Jr. has a bright future with the Nuggets and in the NBA going into the future. And Michael Porter Jr. is capable of doing a lot in the NBA going into the future as long as he stays healthy and plays great basketball. But so far, in the NBA bubble, Michael Porter Jr. has shown what he is capable of going into the future. Bobo from the Nuggets has definitely been a surprise. Bobo has been showing what he is capable of, both on offense and defense. He can play offense and score points. He can score in the paint. He can score bank shots, and he can even score 3-pointers. And with Bobo being 7'2", he has shown what he is capable of on defense and how he can block shots. So Bobo can play basketball both on offense and defense. So for the Nuggets, Bobo has definitely been a surprise. And Michael Porter Jr., they knew what he was capable of. He just has to be on the court and play basketball and not be injured. And there's no doubt that when he's been on the court, he's played good basketball, he's scored a lot of points, and he shows what he is capable of. And the Nuggets are hoping that they can have Michael Porter Jr. as a key player going into the future. But so far, he has shown what he is capable of for the Nuggets. So the Nuggets are happy to have both Michael Porter Jr. and Bobo as being standout players during this NBA bubble down in Orlando. Devin Booker from the Suns, he has shown what he is capable of. And there's no doubt that everybody in the NBA, including the Suns, knows what Devin Booker is capable of. And during this NBA bubble down in Orlando, Devin Booker has definitely been showing the Suns and the rest of the NBA what he is capable of. And Devin Booker has definitely been leading the Suns by scoring a lot of points, being the leader for the team, and also winning games for the Suns down in Orlando. Damian Lillard from the Trailblazers. The Trailblazers and the rest of the NBA knows what Damian Lillard is capable of in the NBA. And during this NBA bubble down in Orlando, Damian Lillard has been showing how he is the leader of the team, how he can carry the team, score a lot of points, but also win games for the Trailblazers. And there's no doubt that Damian Lillard has been showing that he is the best player for the Trailblazers, but also one of the best players in the NBA. Also, during this NBA bubble down in Orlando, the Suns have definitely been a surprise team by how many games they have been able to win. Also, the Trailblazers, by how many games they've been able to win and how they've been playing down in Orlando in this NBA bubble. And even the Grizzlies have been a surprise team by how they've been playing, because they have not been able to win as many games. And they haven't been playing the way that they were during the normal NBA season before it got suspended. And now in the NBA bubble down in Orlando, the Grizzlies have not been playing the same basketball that they were a few months ago, and they have not been able to win as many games that they should have. And there's even a chance that the Grizzlies will miss the playoffs in the Western Conference because they have not been able to win games and hold on to that 8th seed in the Western Conference so that they can make it into the playoffs. For the first time in NBA history, the top 2 seeds in a conference are from the same city, which includes the number 1 Lakers and the number 2 Clippers from the Western Conference. The Nuggets won the 2019-2020 Northwest Division title, and this is the 5th time in franchise history they have won their division. So right now, I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Nuggets. I'm going to tell you every team the Nuggets went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. So to start off, the Nuggets went against the Trailblazers, and the Nuggets lost to the Trailblazers 125-115. The Nuggets went against the Jazz, and the Nuggets won a close game against the Jazz in double overtime, 134-132. The Nuggets went against the Lakers, and the Nuggets lost a close game against the Lakers, 124-121. And the Nuggets went against the Clippers, and the Nuggets lost to the Clippers, 124-111. In the final game of the 8-game regular season before the NBA playoffs began, the Nuggets will go against the Raptors. And after this 8-game regular season comes to an end, there's no doubt that the Nuggets are going to make the NBA playoffs, and we're just going to have to wait and see what their record is and what seed they will get in the Western Conference. So that's the current schedule for the Nuggets. That's the teams the Nuggets went up against in the last week, and that's the final scores of those games, and that's also who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. To start off in the Eastern Conference, the Bucks have the number 1 seed, the Raptors have the number 2 seed, the Celtics have the number 3 seed, the Heat have the number 4 seed, the Pacers have the number 5 seed, the 76ers have the number 6 seed, the Nets have the number 7 seed, and the Magic have the number 8 seed. In the Western Conference, the Lakers have the number 1 seed, The Clippers have the number 2 seed. The Nuggets have the number 3 seed. The Thunder have the number 4 seed. The Rockets have the number 5 seed. The Jazz have the number 6 seed. The Mavericks have the number 7 seed. And as of right now, the Trailblazers have the number 8 seed. But the number 8 seed in the Western Conference is definitely going to be interesting. And we're going to have to wait and see what team gets that 8 seed in the Western Conference. It's going to be between the Trailblazers and the Grizzlies. So that's the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. And as of right now, both the Eastern and Western Conference is pretty set in stone of what teams are going to make the playoffs. We're just going to have to wait and see what seed they get. And in the Western Conference, we're going to have to wait and see what team gets the 8th seed and what team makes the playoffs in the Western Conference. And it's going to be between the Trailblazers and the Grizzlies. And with the NBA playoffs getting ready to begin within the next week, we're going to have to wait and see what the matchups are and what teams are going against each other in the Eastern and Western Conference. But it's definitely exciting to see that the NBA playoffs is just around the corner and it's going to begin within the next week. Moving on now to Nhl Hockey. So as of right now, the Stanley Cup Playoffs are getting ready to begin. All of the Eastern Conference teams are playing in Toronto, and all of the Western Conference teams are playing in Edmonton. And as of right now, the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs is getting ready to begin as of this week. And here are the matchups of all the teams that are going against each other and what teams made the playoffs in the Eastern and Western Conference. To start off, in the Eastern Conference, number 1 Philadelphia is going against number 8 Montreal. Number 2 Tampa Bay is going against number 7 Columbus. Number 3 Washington is going against number 6 New York Islanders. And number 4 Boston is going against number 5 Carolina. In the Western Conference, number 1 Las Vegas is going against number 8 Chicago. Number 2 Colorado is going against number 7 Arizona. Number 3 Dallas is going against number 6 Calgary. And number 4 St. Louis is going against number 5 Vancouver. So as of right now, since the Stanley Cup Playoffs is getting ready to begin and the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs is underway, that is all the teams that made the Stanley Cup Playoffs in the Eastern and Western Conference. That is all the matchups of what teams are going against each other in the Eastern and Western Conference. Now that all of the matchups are set in both the Eastern and Western Conference, we now know what teams are going against each other, and we know what teams are making the Stanley Cup Playoffs in the Eastern and Western Conference. And now the Stanley Cup Playoffs have officially begun, and now it's the beginning of the Stanley Cup Playoffs, and it's time for the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Avalanche as they have made the Stanley Cup Playoffs and they're getting ready to begin the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. So in the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs in the Western Conference, the Avalanche will go against Arizona. So when the 2019-2020 season resumed at the beginning of August for the Western Conference teams up in Edmonton, on August 2nd, the Avalanche went against St. Louis, and the Avalanche won a close game against St. Louis 2-1. On August 5th, the Avalanche went against Dallas, and the Avalanche beat Dallas 4-0. And on August 8th, the Avalanche went against Las Vegas, but unfortunately, the Avalanche lost a close game to Las Vegas in overtime 4-3, and since the Avalanche lost to Las Vegas, the Avalanche landed up being the number 2 seed in the Western Conference for the Stanley Cup Playoffs. So with the Avalanche being the number 2 seed in the Western Conference for the Stanley Cup Playoffs, there was no doubt that the Avalanche were guaranteed to make it into the Stanley Cup Playoffs even before the season got paused back in March. And when the season resumed at the beginning of August, the Avalanche were guaranteed to make the playoffs. Regardless if it was back in March or now in August, the Avalanche were going to make the playoffs. So with the Avalanche being the number 2 seed in the Western Conference, the Avalanche landed up going against Arizona in the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. So, in the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs, the Avalanche will go against Arizona. And as of this week, the Stanley Cup Playoffs has begun for the Eastern and Western Conference teams. The Eastern Conference teams will play in Toronto, and the Western Conference teams will play in Edmonton. And for the Avalanche, we're going to have to wait and see how many games they win and if they can win this series against Arizona in the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. But there's no doubt that the Avalanche are one of the teams that are favored to come out of the Western Conference and reach the Stanley Cup Final, and the Avalanche are also one of the teams that are favored to win the Stanley Cup for this season. We're just going to have to wait and see how the Avalanche play in the Stanley Cup Playoffs, and can they reach the Stanley Cup Final, and can they win the Stanley Cup? We're just going to have to wait and see. So that's the current schedule for the Avalanche as they're heading in to the Stanley Cup Playoffs and getting ready to begin the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs in the Western Conference. And now that the Stanley Cup Playoffs are underway, we're just going to have to wait and see how all of the teams play in the Eastern and Western Conference, what teams win what series, and what teams advance far into the Stanley Cup Playoffs, and what 2 teams will meet up in the Stanley Cup Final, and what team will win the Stanley Cup for this season. We're just going to have to wait and see. But as of right now, the Stanley Cup Playoffs have begun as of this week, and we now know what teams have made the playoffs in the Eastern and Western Conference, and what teams will go against each other in the Eastern and Western Conference in the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Moving on now to end the show, what to watch for this week in sports. The Rockies, Major League Baseball, the Nuggets, NBA basketball, the Stanley Cup Playoffs, the Avalanche, Nhl Hockey, NFL training camp. Moving on now, on the next show, I will talk about the coronavirus, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and NHL hockey. I hope you all have a great week. Tune in to the next All Sports with Gerardo show next week. I want to say thank you to everybody that listens to All Sports. Subscribe or like my pages on social media at All Sports with Gerardo. Until next time, this is Gerardo.